She had only ever known one rule across the galaxy: fear keeps you alive. But the human before her was about to shatter every expectation. The icy wind howled across the barren plains of the planet, scattering shards of crystal-like frost that glimmered under the twin suns. She stumbled over them, her boots scraping the brittle surface, and cursed in a language that rolled like music yet cut like knives. Her long, elven ears twitched at every sound, detecting the subtle hum of distant machinery, the low thrum of energy shields somewhere unseen, and the faint, ridiculous whistling of the wind, which somehow made her nerves coil tighter. She had been running for hours, or maybe days. Time had a slippery quality here, and her stomach growled louder than any alarm she had ever known. Hunger and fear made a potent, twisting cocktail in her mind, but survival was an art she had been trained for since childhood. She could endure anything, except perhaps humans. The humans arrived with clumsy precision, their vehicles crunching over the frost, wheels skidding on the sharp ice. She froze instantly, and her chest tightened in anticipation of pain, of the snapping of restraints, of the familiar taste of terror that had marked every encounter with their species. She remembered the stories: screams muffled by cold, limbs bound with cruel technology, demands made in harsh, grinding tones. But the man who emerged from the vehicle did something completely unexpected. He didn't shout. He didn't wield a weapon. He tripped over a loose cable, swore in a colorful language that made her ears flick back in shock and, oddly, amusement. She barely had time to register the absurdity before he crouched down, holding out a tray with steaming food that smelled simultaneously foreign and tantalizing. "You look famished," he said, his voice hesitant, as if he had spent a lifetime rehearsing how not to terrify a captured alien. His grin was awkward, bordering on charming in its absurdity. She narrowed her eyes, scanning for traps, for hidden lasers, for any sign that this was some elaborate trick to lure her into a cage or worse. The tray remained steady, the aroma inviting, and for a moment she wondered if her species' wariness had finally met its match in human clumsiness. The irony was almost unbearable. She considered kicking the tray away, or worse, darting into the frozen wasteland, but the growling of her stomach made her pause. She let out a low hiss, a warning, a test, but the man's eyebrows rose as though he had just been scolded by a particularly polite cat. You can eat it, I guess." "No traps," he said, scratching the back of his neck. His boots squeaked as he shifted, a sound entirely inappropriate for a life-or-death encounter. She took a cautious step forward, sniffed the food, and then, after an agonizingly long beat, picked up a morsel with fingers that had been trained to kill and defend. Her tongue flicked, tasting warmth and sustenance, and her eyes widened, reflecting the twin suns in a way that almost made the man flinch. She blinked, unsure if she had imagined the absence of pain. He was just being kind. Around them, her supposed captors, other humans, watched with restrained amazement. One of them muttered something under his breath, which the man misheard as a complaint about his cooking skills, and replied with, "Hey, that's actually perfectly edible." Her ears twitched at the tone, and she suppressed a laugh, which sounded like chimes in a cathedral. She had never experienced humor in a moment like this, and yet, somehow, it fit. The tension in her shoulders relaxed fractionally, enough for her to notice the small absurdities of the human's behavior. The way one of them tried to look menacing while balancing on a slippery patch of ice, or how another tripped over a cable with a dramatic flourish. She finished the first bite and dared a glance at the man. His eyes crinkled in a smile that was almost impossibly genuine. "See, not so bad," he said, and she tilted her head, a flick of an ear betraying her incredulity. She wanted to lash out, to assert dominance as her instincts demanded, but the warmth from the food and the odd humor in his demeanor tugged at something deep in her chest. Something dangerous, curiosity. He didn't speak again immediately, letting her eat in silence, as if the act of survival was sacred and the simple sharing of nourishment a kind of truce. She moved cautiously, testing her restraints, now loosened, feeling the strange thrill of freedom without violence. Her mind ran through calculations, probabilities, escape routes, but she also noticed the way his hands were careful, precise, and oddly elegant when he arranged the utensils. One of them clattered loudly against the tray, and he made a small, self-deprecating grimace. She almost laughed aloud. "Do humans always behave like this?" she asked finally, her voice hesitant, melodic, carrying the edge of disbelief. The man scratched his head again, shrugged, and muttered, "Only on Tuesdays and sometimes Fridays." His deadpan delivery made her ears flick sharply in surprise. She snorted quietly, the sound alien and musical, earning him a wide-eyed expression of shock and brief laughter from one of the observing humans. As the wind continued to shriek outside, she realized something extraordinary. She was not in immediate danger. She had expected violence and found humor. She had expected pain and found patience. She had expected deception and found kindness. Her stomach settled, her shoulders uncoiled, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, she allowed herself to think about something besides escape. She allowed herself to look at him, not just as a captor, not as a human, but as someone capable of something entirely unexpected. He offered her another bite, his smile reassuring, and she took it with a cautious grace. Around them, the humans exchanged baffled glances, some shaking their heads as if trying to comprehend this sudden reversal of expectations. And she, the alien girl who had feared torture above all else, felt a tiny, ridiculous spark of amusement and gratitude in the middle of the frozen wasteland. The universe might be vast and cruel, but perhaps, for once, it could be ridiculous too. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was exactly what she needed to survive. The laboratory hummed with a low, steady vibration, like the purring of some immense mechanical beast. Tubes of liquid glowed with bioluminescent colors, shifting from violet to green in slow, hypnotic pulses. The alien woman crouched beside one of the observation platforms, her long ears angled toward every sound, flicking independently as though they were small, sentient antennae. Her skin, pale with a faint luminescent sheen, shimmered under the cool white lights, and her hair fell over one shoulder in a soft, silver wave. She had been brought here against her will, yet the usual sharp edge of fear was tempered by a strange, almost absurd atmosphere. The scientists around her were more concerned with calibrating instruments than asserting authority, and one of them had tripped over a cable with a graceless flourish that sent a stack of data pads clattering. "Careful," the human man muttered, his voice threading between patience and exasperation. "Those aren't paper airplanes. They're experiments." The alien woman's lips quirked into the faintest smile. Humor was an alien language, and yet she found herself understanding it better than the complicated machinery before her. She shifted on her heels, glancing at a hovering drone that zipped in erratic circles, bumping occasionally into walls with a squeak that sounded vaguely like a squeaky toy. She stifled a laugh, her ears twitching at the ridiculousness of it all. Humans were supposed to be terrifying, predators, captors, hunters, but here they seemed clumsy and surprisingly gentle, their seriousness undercut by perpetual accidents. A holographic display flickered to life in front of them, a three-dimensional map of a star system she barely recognized. She leaned closer, her eyes tracing the luminous lines, her mind calculating gravitational pulls, energy signatures, and resource nodes. The man followed her gaze, nodding in mock solemnity. "Ah yes, the All-Andromeda snack bar," he said, pointing at a tiny glowing dot that represented a planet rich in minerals. "Prime spot for galactic tourists or extremely inconvenient meteor showers." She blinked at him, caught somewhere between incredulity and amusement. This human, who had initially seemed awkward and uncertain, now moved through the laboratory with a confidence that suggested he knew exactly how to get away with sarcasm in zero gravity. "Zero gravity," she murmured, testing the words as if tasting a new spice. The man grinned. "Oh yes, just a pinch of it, and maybe some spontaneous turbulence for flavor." He flicked a switch, and the floor panels retracted, revealing a vertical column of air that lifted small objects into floating arcs. A clipboard floated past her nose, and she reflexively caught it, gripping it with long, delicate fingers. She twirled it around experimentally, her ears swiveling as she tried to control the strange, unpredictable currents. The man watched, hands clasped behind his back, a hint of bemusement in his eyes. "Careful, you'll start expecting all your meals to levitate next," he said. She rolled her eyes, though the corner of her mouth betrayed a reluctant smile. Around them, other humans scurried, adjusting lasers, calibrating sensors, and occasionally bumping into floating objects with exaggerated apologies. The alien woman observed them, her eyes catching the glint of determination beneath the chaos. There was method here, beneath the apparent disorder. She had studied species for survival, evaluated threats, and calculated escape routes, but something about this place, this odd, haphazard laboratory, made her pause. The man approached her again, carrying a tray of strange, luminous fruit that pulsed faintly, as though it were aware of being observed. "Here," he said, "you might find this nutritious, and not likely to explode, probably." She arched an eyebrow, then took a small piece, testing it with a finger. The moment it touched her tongue, a wave of warmth and sweetness spread through her, and she felt the tension in her shoulders loosen ever so slightly. "Explosions not included?" she asked, lips twitching. The man shrugged with mock gravity. "They're extra but optional, usually on Thursdays." Her ears flicked in disbelief, then amusement. Humor was invading her mind slowly, like a gentle current. The fear she had brought with her, the primal, unyielding terror of humans, was dissipating in small, absurd increments. She could see the logic of their caution, the careful balance of experiments, and the unspoken, quiet respect in the way he treated her. Not as a specimen, but as something unpredictable, valuable. Human and alien alike, they were navigating the unknown together, and neither of them had expected cooperation to feel so absurdly natural. She moved toward a console, examining a series of glowing glyphs that projected into midair, attempting to decipher their function. The man leaned against the railing, watching her with an expression that mixed admiration and disbelief. "You're quick," he said. "Almost as quick as my grandma when she hears the ice cream truck." She blinked, momentarily caught between incredulity and a stifled chuckle. Humor, terrifyingly human humor, was sneaking into the most dangerous corners of her mind. She had been trained to anticipate betrayal, deceit, and pain. Yet here she was, intrigued and entertained, calculating the movement of an alien interface while simultaneously appreciating a joke that had nothing to do with her survival. Above them, the laboratory's artificial sun shifted in a slow arc, casting long, shimmering shadows across the walls. Tiny drones zipped overhead, tracing invisible lines of data in the air, while an array of machines hummed, beeped, and occasionally emitted a soft pop that startled her, then made her laugh involuntarily. The man grinned at her reaction, and for a moment the galaxy's chaos, the interstellar politics, the wars she had fled, all of it seemed absurdly distant. Here, in this improbable laboratory, humor and curiosity were weapons, shields, and bridges all at once. She let herself imagine what might come next. Floating corridors, glowing fruit, humans tripping over themselves in a never-ending parade of clumsiness, and herself learning that even amidst fear, even amidst the unknown, laughter could exist. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough to survive another day. The corridor was alive with flickering lights that pulsed like the heartbeat of the station itself. She moved carefully, her long, elven ears swiveling toward every faint whir of servos and hiss of cooling vents. Her boots barely made a sound against the smooth, metallic floor, and yet every step seemed amplified in the vast emptiness, echoing with the sort of precision that would have made a predator proud, or at least a careful prey. She paused, observing the human man as he approached, carrying a small box that emitted faint, rhythmic beeps. "I promise it's not a bomb," he said, tilting his head with mock seriousness. She raised an eyebrow, a subtle arch that conveyed equal parts skepticism and curiosity. Humor, she realized, was becoming less alien with each passing hour. The way he said it, the way his grin was just a touch too ridiculous for danger, made her ears twitch in reluctant amusement. The box beeped again, and she bent forward, cautiously examining the alien glyphs projected along its surface. They shifted, responded to her touch, and after a moment of careful prodding, a thin stream of light shot out, dancing along the walls and ceiling like liquid neon. "Impressive," she murmured, her voice melodic but edged with suspicion. He grinned. Yeah, it's my pride and joy, built it myself, mostly, with some help, and a lot of trial and error, mostly error. Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile, as the absurdity of the statement struck her. Here she was, an alien raised in the rigid strictures of survival, learning that humans could be equal parts ingenious and ridiculous simultaneously. She wandered closer to the observation window, the stars stretching infinitely before them, scattered across the black velvet of space. The twin suns of this sector shimmered, casting faint reflections across her skin. Her gaze lingered on the cosmos, and she felt the pull of curiosity, an unfamiliar yet intoxicating sensation. The man joined her, hands resting lightly on the railing, but careful not to crowd her. "You know," he said, glancing at her, "most aliens I've met never even stop to look. They're usually too busy calculating escape trajectories or plotting revenge." She turned her head, ears twitching. "And you?" she asked, tone sharp but curious. "Do humans just wander?" He shrugged. "Some of us. Others trip over their own feet while trying to be heroic. But hey, it works out sometimes." The humor, delivered with such casual ease, made her chest loosen with something she hadn't felt in a long time, the possibility of trust. The lab behind them hummed and clicked, a living organism of wires and screens and floating drones. One of the drones zipped past her shoulder, spinning in a loop before bouncing harmlessly off a wall. She flinched, then suppressed a laugh at the ridiculous choreography. The man caught her reaction, raising an eyebrow. "See, even the tech has a sense of humor," he said. She blinked, ears flicking, and muttered, "Or the universe does." He tilted his head, considering this with mock solemnity. "Could be either. Personally, I like to think it's just my cooking." She moved to a console, examining a cluster of orbs suspended in midair, their surfaces swirling with liquid light. Her fingers brushed against them carefully, feeling subtle pulses of energy, sensing the patterns beneath the chaos. "What are these?" she asked, genuinely intrigued. "Oh, those," he said, leaning over. "Interstellar mood rings, measures morale, stress, and occasional sarcasm levels, mostly the last one. We had a test run yesterday. Let's just say the coffee machine got offended." She raised an eyebrow so sharply that it almost twitched in rhythm with her ears. "The coffee machine?" "Long story," he said, stepping back with a grin. "But apparently, it doesn't appreciate being unplugged for maintenance." She shook her head, caught between disbelief and laughter, realizing that even amidst advanced science, absurdity thrived. Her eyes drifted to a small chamber nearby, where a cluster of plants glowed faintly, their bioluminescent leaves bending toward the light. The man noticed her gaze. "Those are xenoflora samples. And before you ask, yes, they're mostly harmless. Unless you're allergic to charm," he said with mock gravity. She tilted her head, ears twitching, and the corners of her mouth curved. She realized she had never imagined a captured alien could find herself entertained by her captors. Yet here she was, watching glowing plants and listening to improbable jokes about sentient coffee machines. Humor had begun to dismantle the walls of fear she had built with painstaking care. A sudden alarm buzzed softly, causing her to startle, and the man waved a hand dismissively. "Relax, just a minor recalibration. Nothing about imminent doom this time, promise." She frowned, scanning the room for hidden weapons, deadly gas, anything that might indicate trickery, but found only a flurry of humans scrambling over their devices, some tripping, some grumbling, all oddly harmless. She allowed herself to take a deep breath, the tension in her shoulders easing. Perhaps the humans were not what she had feared. Perhaps some of them, at least, could be trusted. As the minutes passed, the alien woman moved closer to the central console, her curiosity overtaking instinctive caution. The man followed at a safe distance, joking occasionally about her elven ears, catching stray radio signals, or detecting sarcasm from 3 light-years away. She twitched her ears in mock offense, almost laughing out loud, her chest lightened by the playful absurdity. For the first time in her memory, she felt the strange interplay of fear and amusement, realizing that life did not always demand rigidity and suspicion. Floating above the lab, a holographic map shimmered, showing planets, moons, and streaks of starlight like brushstrokes across the cosmos. She leaned over it, tracing the arcs of orbiting satellites and energy flows, her mind racing with possibilities. The man hovered nearby, hands clasped, making small, humorous commentary about the cosmic coffee delivery routes and accidental asteroid parking zones. She allowed herself a laugh, a soft, melodic sound that turned heads, even startling a hovering drone. Her ears flicked in surprise at her own reaction. Humor, she realized, had a strange gravity of its own, capable of bending fear into trust, suspicion into curiosity. By the time the human turned to adjust the controls again, she realized she had spent hours in this laboratory, entertained, engaged, and disarmed by nothing more than patience, absurdity, and the careful presentation of kindness. The universe outside remained vast, unknown, and potentially lethal, yet here, amidst blinking lights and floating orbs, she felt cautiously safe. Perhaps trust, she thought, was less about assurance and more about recognizing the delightful unpredictability in a universe full of danger, and humans, for all their clumsy heroics, were proving startlingly capable of delivering it. The observation deck was quiet, though the hum of the station's systems vibrated softly beneath their feet, a constant reminder of the machinery that kept the vast orbiting habitat alive. Outside, a nebula stretched across the void in ribbons of violet and gold, dust motes twinkling like distant stars caught in a cosmic dance. She stood near the railing, her long elven ears twitching at the slightest whisper of the ventilation system, a habit formed from years of alertness and survival instincts. She was no longer tense, no longer bracing herself for violence at every human motion. Instead, there was a cautious serenity to her posture, a gentle rhythm in her breathing, a slight smile playing at the edges of her lips. The man approached slowly, carrying a small container filled with a luminous fruit she had come to enjoy, its pulsing glow reminding her of the heartbeat of this station, of the strange, living rhythm of life among the stars. "I thought you might like one," he said, holding it out with a grin that had become familiar, almost comforting. She raised an eyebrow, her ears flicking, and then with deliberate care took it. She tasted it, savoring the warmth and sweetness, and allowed herself a quiet laugh at the absurdity of finding comfort in glowing alien fruit. The man's eyes twinkled, and he made a low, conspiratorial whisper. "It also doubles as a conversation starter for interspecies diplomacy, in case you were wondering." She twitched an ear at him, a hint of amusement and incredulity, and muttered, "I think I could survive a war zone with you around." They watched the nebula in companionable silence, letting the vibrancy of colors and the vastness of space speak between them. For her, the journey to this moment had been a gauntlet of fear, suspicion, and survival. Every instinct told her to distrust humans, every memory screamed to anticipate cruelty. And yet, here she was, standing freely, tasting the smallest pleasures, and realizing that her perception of an entire species had shifted. She had expected terror, and instead had found humor, patience, and astonishing kindness. The fear that had defined her life now seemed like a distant echo, a shadow that had been gently softened by the persistence of gentle human absurdity. The station's AI made a soft chime, signaling incoming communications. The man glanced at the display, his expression half serious, half sarcastic. "Ah, my weekly reminder that someone out there still thinks I can fix a starship with duct tape and optimism," he muttered. She laughed quietly, the sound bright and musical, and the sound carried easily in the metallic space. The moment felt fragile, improbable, yet deeply grounding. She realized that humor, patience, and kindness could act as tools as powerful as the most advanced technology. They could bridge the abyss of fear, of cultural misunderstanding, of suspicion and isolation. Her gaze returned to him, noting the subtle changes in herself. Where once she had observed humans only for threats, she now recognized nuances, gestures, and quirks. She had learned to anticipate not pain, but absurdity, not cruelty, but possibility. Her long ears twitched in delight at the playful way he nudged a floating drone back into alignment, almost as if it were a pet rather than a tool. Her laughter, once cautious and rare, now rang freely, blending with his occasional chuckles and the soft hum of the station. Even in silence, there was communication, an understanding forged from shared experience, risk, and the gentle dismantling of fear. A sudden flicker of movement outside caught her attention. A small freighter gliding past the station's observation window, its lights reflecting in the nebula's glow. She leaned forward, her curiosity sparking. "Where do you suppose it's going?" she asked, tone light but sincere. He shrugged, smiling. "Probably somewhere exciting, or somewhere that will make someone very, very cross. Either way, it's our kind of chaos." She tilted her head, her ears flicking with interest. And for the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, not to a planet, not to a species, but to the unexpected alliances and peculiarities of the universe itself. They moved toward the center of the deck, standing side by side, watching the nebula shift and pulse. She felt her shoulders relax fully, her posture no longer defensive. The journey she had endured, from fear and suspicion to cautious trust and even amusement, had changed her. The hardness that survival had forced upon her had softened, tempered by laughter, curiosity, and the gentle absurdity of human care. She was no longer only a survivor. She was a participant, a witness, and perhaps unexpectedly, a friend. The man nudged a floating panel toward her, gesturing with an exaggerated bow. "Your turn," he said, eyes sparkling with humor. She laughed openly this time, catching the panel and flipping it with careful precision, sending it into a graceful spin. He clapped lightly, mock applause filling the metallic space. "Impressive. I would say intergalactic diplomacy just got a lot more interesting." She shook her head, amusement and disbelief mingling, and her ears flicked in acknowledgement. She realized she had come to this place expecting danger, yet found delight. She had come to encounter cruelty, yet discovered kindness. She had arrived with fear, and now, as the station continued its silent orbit around the distant star, she turned to him fully, meeting his eyes. "I never thought humans could surprise me like this," she said, her voice soft but steady. He grinned, shrugging in mock humility. "Neither did I," he replied. "Guess that's the fun part." She allowed herself a final, quiet laugh, her long ears flicking once, twice, as if testing the truth of it. The vast, dangerous universe stretched before them. But for the first time, she felt ready, not merely to survive, but to face it with curiosity, humor, and the strange, unanticipated warmth of companionship. In that orbiting deck, beneath the swirl of nebula and stars, the alien woman who had feared torture found herself transformed. She had survived, yes, but more than survival, she had discovered connection, laughter, and the improbable courage to trust. And in that moment, as she shared a quiet joke with the man who had defied her expectations at every turn, the vastness of space seemed less cold, less threatening, and infinitely